was so we're starting at Gufa on Daled Amud Aleph, says your Gufa. V'yatzah chinam. What is v'yatzah chinam? So we go back into the Gemara earlier on. V'yatzah chinam ein kasef, right? That's the pasuk. That's the pasuk that tells us that when an amma iriya reaches a certain age, v'yatzah chinam ein kasef, she goes out. She leaves from the place that she was employed. And v'yatzah chinam, she goes out for free. Meaning, what does it mean v'yatzah chinam?
She goes out for free.
That she doesn't get it. She doesn't get anything.
What does v'yatzah chinam mean? She goes out for free from
Goes
whom?
free.
From the guy who bought her. Remember, initially he bought her. He engaged her. There was a whole story there. But as she hits a certain stage, and we'll get there now, which we know, right? Yatzah chinam, she leaves, she goes out. And kasef means what? There's no money. Meaning, there's no money. And the Gemara made that drosha, and kasef ladon zev, yesh kesef ladon acher, that he doesn't get the money when she leaves, but somebody else will get the money when she leaves from his house. And who's that person? That's the father at that age of Narus, that she will that the money is given to somebody. Okay, I'm going to spotlight myself. It's easier. Okay, so if that's the case, says the Gemara, what is v'yatzah chinam ein kasef? V'yatzah chinam elu yemei bagrus, and kesef elu yemei na'arus. Okay, so which one comes first in the order of happening? Firstly, obviously, you get Narus, and after Narus, you get Bagrus. Okay, Rashi says, if you look at Rashi, it's up in the top. I want to just go through this. I want to try at least develop this little idea quite well, and then we're going to move on. Okay, so if you look at the Rashi says that v'yatzah chinam v'lo piresh masayat. So it doesn't say when. So therefore, the Gemara has to make the darshan it out. So he says, Eli yemei bagrus, shehi mishtane minarus liyois bogeres. What does it mean that she becomes a bogeres? That there's a difference in her being physically, whatever the case is. It doesn't say, it's not clear. He mishtane minarus liyois bogeres, to become a bogeres. It's through age, it's through showing different simanim. Okay. Ein kasef, ela davar acher motzia. Something else. There's no kesef that is moitzia. Now, this is how the Gemara learns us out at this point. There's no money that brings her out. Ela yemei narus. What brings her out is what? Is the yemei narus, the fact that she reaches a certain age. Ulakame parich. And later on, it will be parich. What's parich? What does it mean?
The Gemara is going to ask.
The Gemara is going to ask. Ulakame parich. The Gemara is going to ask. Since she goes out anyway, Banarus, Bagrus, my avidate. What on earth do I need Bagrus for? If you got a status, if you say I can go out at 12, then why are you telling me I can go out at 13? Right? What's the point? Because we call that what? The Kal V'chomer. Simple Kal V'chomer. It's a basic concept of a Kal V'chomer. So if that's the case, this Rashi is letting us into a secret. And the secret is that the Gemara is worried. Remember Rashi. Oh, there we go. Rashi is letting out the secret. The secret is that the Gemara is worried about the way we formulated this brisa. And the fact that Rashi mentions it should tell us already that there's going to be a gufa, because there's a problem with the brisa. The brisa doesn't make sense. Now, let's just look where it doesn't make sense. On the one thing we say, v'yatzah chinam ein kasef, v'yatzah chinam is bagrus, and ein kasef is narus. So which should come first? That's like a red flag. There's something wrong with this thing. The Gemara didn't discuss it because the Gemara wasn't interested in discussing it at that point. It was proving another point. Here the Gemara was talking about the kesef aspect of it. Now the Gemara is looking at the structural aspect, the actual technical base of what we have to look at. So it says the Gemara, Elu yemei bagrus en kesef elu yemei narus V'lichtov rachmana narus v'lo by bagrus. So just write narus. What do I need? What do I need? The bagrus aspect of this. So Rava says, Bazeh v'limed al zeh. Bazeh v'limed al zeh. This thing comes and teaches about that thing. So now look, there's quite a long Rashi here that I want to look at. It's quite an important Rashi. Bazeh v'limed al zeh. Says Rashi, Mitoch shelo pirush narus b'mikra, ela me'elav hu lamad. He says the reality is that we never learn Mount Narus. There's no specific mention of Narus. It doesn't say about her coming out as a Nara. We make v'yatzachina in kasef also, but so what? So it says ela me'elav hu lamad. You know how we learn it? We learn it from a very simple logical deduction. There is no other thing that will take her out except a status change. She was a katana, now she's a nara. So since she's a nara, it must be the narus that's taking her out. We still need to write both of them. Since there was no specific mention of a specific thing we were coming out, we need to mention both of them. The ikas of chad. Why? Because if I'd only written one, hava amina, I would have had the hava amina. I would have thought what? Bagrusud ashmi'in and kra. I would have thought that bagrus is the thing that is implied in the pasuk, the thing that takes her out. Because narus is a status that's a very strange status. When I speak to you, and I would ask you about the status of a person. Funny, my son told my 12-year-old told me they're going to teach them about puberty tomorrow. Okay, that's the adolescence talk. Right? That's the one that no father wants to give to their child, no madrich wants to give to the it's like all this stuff. You don't really know what's going to happen coming out of that, right? But that's the adolescence talk, right? So what is that? There's two aspects generally, right? You're katana or cotton in the case of a boy. And then you become an adolescent. That's part of the deal. But the reality is, if you think about it, there is like a twilight zone between the two, where you're not yet an adolescent, you're not yet at puberty as such, but you're also not a little baby any longer. And that status, the Gemara says that if we didn't know that it's talking about both states, that talk about the concept of bagras and it's talking about the concept of narut, you wouldn't infer a concept of narut. Having to cry, aval narut, lo mapigla, we would never have learned such a thing out. Ba chaveiroi comes its friend, its partner, v'limed alav, and it comes to teach on that. Korkach chad milayin lenaros asa. It has to be that one is coming for narus, because if it says v'yatzach yinam, and that's talking about bagros, it must mean that the other one is coming to teach about narus, this intermediate stage. Okay? So now that's an important concept, because what we're seeing is that the way the Gemara wants to present it, that you've got that there are certain times where you can't always default into one thing. You have to have a pasuk, because the default may be wrong. And therefore you have a pasuk where the one learns into the other thing. Okay. So if you look at,
At what point does she go from a katana into a nara? Or is nara the middle stage?
The nara is the middle stage. It's an age thing.
So it's katana, nara, bageret.
Katana, nara, bageret, yeah.
So when it says Eliu May Narut, it's talking about that middle period where we're not exactly sure what she is.
Correct.
Almost like a little bit of shmashuk going on there.
But she is of age. And since she is of age, therefore she moves out of being a katana. Okay.
So why do we know what she is if she's of age?
So again?
Why do we not know what she is if she's of age?
Because she's not of a specific age. It's a transitional space.
Right.
It's a transitional space. Okay. Comes along Tosfos. Look at Tosfos. Tosfos ba zeh v'limed al zeh. Okay. So he's going to give us a little bit of a different take, and let's try and understand it. Do you guys look at the Tosfos when you're preparing it all?
Not really. We've been doing quite a few Rashis, but not Tosfos.
Okay. So are you happy to go into the
same thing.
Rashi like we're doing now? Because I think it's important. Okay, good. So
it's
look
nice
at
to do it in Shir.
Also,
Okay,
maybe if you can tell us which sources to look for, like for each week, we can look into them in the week ahead. When I pick 3 or 4, and we can look into them. Just give us a diva masfil, you know.
Okay, fine. Okay, happy to do that. Okay, so look here. So look at this. Tosfos is Bazi, but he made. Excuse me. So I like to be able to sneeze without like worrying that people think you're going to make them sick. Okay, Bazi Evli Medalze. Pirish. What does it mean? Ilo katsav el achad. If only one of them had been written, havemuk milei, but what? Benire yoiser. If only one is written, you go to the one that is most obvious. The Nira Yosef, the one that's most obvious. And what is that? The Bagros. The Im Toimar. What does Im Toimar mean when Tosfos says that?
It's also a question.
Right. So Rabbi David Lappin taught us. Im Toimar asks Tosfos. Simple. Right? Because if you say, if you wish to say, then you get caught up in the whole, a translation of it all. So rather just, say, them to ask Tosfos. Tosfos says, V'lamali v'yatza'achinam. Why do I need v'yatza'achinam? Lilmoid al ein kasef. Just learn it out of ein kasef. Why do I need the learning? Learn the whole thing out of ein kasef. Ha korchach lo yahave matzilin leukmi ein kasef bebagrus ele benarus. He says, and you know why? Because you wouldn't have been able to learn. This is Tosfos saying this. Remember, what did Rashi say? Let's just look at Rashi. Rashi said that since it didn't say narus on its own, right? You have to learn she'ein lanu davar achar litlot yitziaso bo hutzrach lichtov shneim. The ikasav chad have a mina bagrus. We would have defaulted into bagrus. Okay. Tosfos presented that initially. He said we would have defaulted into Bagros because that's the most obvious. But now he says, hold on a second. He says, you know you actually would have learned out not Bagros, you would have learned out Narus. The Haminei Darshinen. Because that's what we learned out earlier on. Aval yesh kesef la'adon acher. We learned, what did we learn earlier on? V'yatza'ah chinam ein kasef. What did we learn? Remember, we did that. I think we did in share. It says, ein kesef la'adon zeh, aval yesh kesef la'adon acher. Do you remember that? V'yatza'ah chinam ein kasef. Who's that talking about?
So we said the father gets the money. Still at that point.
Yes, but we've all got lost. That's what Tosfos is saying. Every one of us got lost in the money in that case. What we forgot about is that who's it talking about? When we say that without going to the second drosha of Bagros and Narus, and Kasef, what's it talking about?
The girl.
Which girl? What's her status?
The maidservant.
A maidservant who becomes what?
Becomes a free
woman.
What kind? The first status of Nara. You understand that? You know, without the second drosha of Bagros and Narus, then our assumption is we're talking about an Nara. She went in as a katana. And Kasef, we learned. If you just go up a little bit. It says the Gemara there. Amara Ravina Imkain Lema sorry, let me say I'm going a little bit up here. It's talking about sorry, I'm It says that's what it's coming out. It's coming to teach us what about a Nara who's removed out. If it's a Nara who's removed out, so then it means that the pasuk on its first blush is talking about a Nara. From the pasuk on its first blush is talking about Nara. That goes different to the way Rashi wanted to learn it, right? Yes, we've got a drosha of V'yatzah Chinam Bagros and Chinam and Kasef, but it would seem to be if you didn't have that whole drosha, then the pasuk would be pointing, says Tosfos, to a na'ara. אבל יש כסף לאדון אחר, ותנו אב, אם כן, על כוח ההי קרא איירי בנארוס, says Tosus. Di'idu b'bagrus ein ha'av zakai b'kedushin. Says you have to say that. You know why you have to say that the pasuk is talking about a nara? Because it says v'yatza'achinam ein kesef l'adon zeh, aval yesh kesef l'adon acher. It can't be talking about a bogeris. Why? Because if it's talking about a bogeris, who gets the money? She gets the money. There's not even a havamina that the father will get the money when she's a bogeris. So you've got two very opposing droshas in the same pasuk. You understand that?
And then she would be a maidservant for a very short amount of time, because surely she can't be a maidservant as a katana.
No, she can. She can. The father can sell her in at 3 years old. You know how helpful those 3-year-olds are around the house. They break everything. Lekker. No, so she can. Theoretically, this is all theory, guys. This is not like practical, reality, it seems. But in theory, she can be sold as a katana. But then she becomes a nara, she comes out. And then if she's unsold there to another husband, who gets the money? The father. So if the father gets the money, because ein kesef l'adon zeh v'yesh kesef l'adon acher, it must be that it's talking about the status of a nara. And if that's the case, because why says Bagra the ein la via reshus ba for omer haram the ilav yatzah chinam, if it not said yatzah chinam, have a mukminen ein kasef. So I would have known ein kasef. I don't have to. It's obvious that there's no case if it's talking about a bogeris. If it's talking about a bogeris, so it comes along with. So that's why you need to have the yatzah chinam as a bogeres and kasef as the nara. So you have to have both together. Learning the one from the other Tosfos is not saying that because it says one thing, it means the other thing. What he's saying is that you need both of them to come together to be able to learn it out properly. Because if you didn't have both of them coming together, you wouldn't be able to learn it out properly. There's a lot in this Tosfos that I'm not going to go into too much, but that's what he said. That's the nafkamina between him and Rashi. Rashi is saying we learn the one to learn the other, and Tosfos is saying no, we're learning them all together in order to make sure that we can derive correctly. But I wanted to show you something, and that is, let me just let's call get this up here. Yeah. I'm going to share my screen. So this is from, it's called Viki Shiva. Okay, Viki Shiva. What is Viki Shiva? Viki Shiva is, anyone know who this is? Shivat Beit El. Okay, it's quite a legit spot. Okay, so let me make this so we can see it. Can you guys see it? You see it well enough. Do you want me to make it bigger?
Yeah.
Let me make it bigger quickly. Just give me a sec. Oh God, I got to tell you this thing that I learned today from the Ishbitzer. It's just I'll tell you at the end. Just do this quickly because it's mamish of this world. Are you able to see my screen? Or do you see the Word document on the screen? No. Okay. I'm gonna have to undo the screen sharing.
We're still on the Wikipedia page.
Okay. Let me just get up to that. And I don't know how you switch the screen when you're sharing. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Apologies. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a Word document.
Okay, you got it. So he says here, what is this concept of ba'zeh v'limud al-zeh? So he says, Shnei nosim haksuvim b'Torah l'gabe din echad. 2 topics that are written in the Torah regarding one din. Yesh shenichtav noiseh echad kedei lefaresh es hanoiseh hasheni. That sometimes what the Torah will do, it'll write the one subject in order to be mafaresh, to explain the next subject. Le dugma, as it says. Now this dugma that it's going to bring now is like the classic dugma, which is the dugma that is going to be brought in our Gemara. Because what the Gemara carries on to say is that Ba'az Evrim Dal Zeh, Midi Dehave Atoishav Sachir, like the case of Toishav and Sachir. So let's look at the case of Toishav and Sachir, and then we'll come back. Okay? So Toishav and Sachir. When you learned it, you learned the concept of Toishav and Sachir, where it says Toishav Kohen v'Sachir lo yachel kadesh. It says in Vayikra that a Toishav Kohen v'Sachir lo yachel kadesh. They are not allowed to eat kadesh. What does that mean? V'lamdu chachamim shadin shenemar kanhu the following. This is the din. Shetoishav hainu eved ivri. What's a toishav? We would call like a resident, right? Toishav is an eved ivri shenirtza. An eved irtzi that what's nirtza? Not the Pesach nirtza, the other nirtza with an ayin. Okay, what happens to an Eved Ivri? An Eved Ivri comes and he's loving being a slave, right? He's loving.
Wants to stay.
Correct. So what happens to him?
The ear thing.
Correct. They take this all and they give him an earring, okay? And they kind of like they knock him onto the doorpost and he stays on the doorpost. And then they obviously pull it out and he goes to serve. It doesn't have to, that's it. But it means that he's now permanently a slave. Okay, until Yovel, right? So we're talking about an Eved Ivri Shenirtza. We're talking about a Jew decided he was happy to be with this coin. He's a slave to the coin and he gets Nirtza. So that's the number one. But Sachir, what's a Sachir? Sachir normally means someone you pay. Right? It's like a rented worker. Sachir in this case, Hainu Eved Ivri, it's talking about an Eved Ivri, Ayotze B'Sov Sheishanim. He goes out after 6 years. So you're on the one guy who's going to stay enslaved, and the other one who's going to go out after 6 years. Now, what's the thing? They're not allowed to eat kodshim in the house of their master, the Kohen. Now, why is that such a strange concept? It's a strange concept. It's a Kiddushin in the Torah, because if you are a non-Jewish slave, you can eat the truma till the cows come out. No issue. But a Jewish slave who gets, even one who's nirtza, even one who wants to stay in for the extra time, that Jewish slave still is not allowed to eat from the truma or any of the other kochim. Why? This is important to understand because let's finish this and I'll explain it to you. Okay, let's go. So he carries on, he says, yeah. Even though that the Torah could have said a toishav, which is erev nirtza ena oichel, right? If a toishav, which is an erev nirtza, which is a person who has committed himself to that family for all that time until the Yovel year, immediately, we would have known immediately. And obviously, if the guy who's committed to the family can't eat, obviously the guy who's going to leave at some point in time, he definitely can eat. Nonetheless, the Torah writes them both. Why? If I'd only written the Toshav, I would have thought that the Toshav is meaning the Eved Ivri who leaves after 6 years, because that's the first level. So therefore, right? The Omnam Eved Ivri, we would have thought that the Eved Ivri would eat the kodshim. Therefore, it also says Sachir, to teach us that the Eved Ivri, that who is Nirtza, also can't eat the kodshim, even though he's acquired forever until Yovel. So what's going on here is that you have in the concept of the halacha, you have this concept of an acquisition, that the master owns the slave, but he doesn't totally own him. Why not? Because you can't own a Jew. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu owns a Jew. A Jew, by his very definition, is a person of Chayrus. By very definition. Even if he puts himself in a situation of absolute slavery with a Jewish master, that Jewish master cannot own his very essence. Whereas by a non-Jew, he can, 100%. He'll own him like he's a cell phone. Therefore, he can eat the truma, whereas the Yid can't. Okay? But the assumption is that he should be able to, because in the case of a nirtza, because he's so committed to the family, the Torah has to write it out that he can't, and has to say both of them, because it has to say sachir, toishav, and sachir, toishav and sachir. And you're going to learn the fact that it writes the one, it assists us. That's what it means. He wants to say, it assists us to learn out the other one from the fact that we've got them both together. They need to come in tandem. Okay, that's a style thing in the Gemara. The Gemara he brings another example, which is a nice example and something for us just to bear in mind. Dugma nosefes, Ne'emar b'Torah, it says lo titom v'lo titor, that you mustn't take nakama, and you mustn't. So it's avenge and revenge. Avenge and revenge. Va'amru chachamim said, what's the difference between Nakima and Natira? So this is the case. Amalo hishilani magelcha. He says, okay, can I borrow your spade? So the guy says, Amalei love. He says, no. So then, malamachar amalo hishilani kardomecha. He says, well, the next day he says, well, can I borrow your lawnmower? So Amalei einu mashilcha kaderech shloish altiyata. He says, I'm not lending you the same way you didn't lend me. What's that? That's called nakama. That's called revenge. I say to you, you didn't do it, therefore I'm not doing it. So Amalo Heilach, and if he says to him, take it, no, take it, of course. And then he comes, I'm not the oak who doesn't lend my stuff like you. I lend my stuff. Is that okay? No, Zohi Natira. That's called Natira. I could learn out the nakama from the Natira. Because in Asulin Torah, if I cannot say to the guy, you can take it, but I'm not like you, I can't say to the guy, I'm not giving it to you. Nonetheless, Katva Torah gam isu nekima. The Torah writes isu nekima lafisha im lo haya koitev elo titor. If I'd only said the issue of natira, hayitu oimer shezehu nekima. Then I would have thought that natira is nekima. V'asarak lamar, and only I'm not allowed to do nekima. All right. So therefore, you have both of them. So the reason why this one is learning on the next one is because if you only had the one, you would default into one of the options. Like Tosis was saying, I would default into what? Into the option of Narus, not into the option of Bagrus. Why? Because of the way the Gemara presents it. Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi says differently. But that's just I wanted to point out that we've got these two different things that are happening at the same time here in this Gemara. So then Kelly's on the Gemara.
So is Natira also Asur?
Yes, absolutely. But you wouldn't have been able to learn it if it had only said Nakima. And if it only said...
So Natira is saying to somebody that... So Natira is saying to somebody, I will lend you because you didn't lend me.
Even though you didn't lend me.
So it's spitefulness, basically.
Yes, it's spite. It's like holding a grudge. It's holding a grudge. You know what we'd call it? We call it a faribel. That's really what it is. That's like the ultimate faribel. I'll give you, and guilt. It's like Jewish guilt, faribel, all coming in one big hit. I'll give you mine even though you won't give me yours. That's how I do. Okay. So, says the Gemara on that. Says the Gemara, backing out the Gemara, that is mididahave, this concept of Bazi Avrimid al-Zeh is mididahave a-toishev a-sachir. It's like the toishev and the sachir. What's the toishev and the sachir? This case, the Tanya, toishev zeh kanu ikinin oilam, sachir zeh kanu ikinin shanim. The one is acquired forever, the other one is just only for the 6 years. Yom ha-toishev v'lo yom ha-sachir, just write the one and not the other. V'yani oime, kinu ikinin oilam, eino oichel, kinu ikinin shanim, lo kol shekain, I would have made a kol shekain, a basic kal v'chomer. Ilu kain ayisi oimer toishuv ze kenu kinyan shanim. About kinyan oilam oichel. But then I would have had the problem, exactly what we just learned now, that if I'd said it the one way, I wouldn't have been able to learn the whole lot. Bas sachir v'limed al toishav. The sachir comes and teaches us on the toishav. It teaches us on the other one. She'afal pisha kanu kinyan oilam. Even though it's a kinyan oilam, it's a forever kinyan. Einoi oichel. He doesn't get to eat. He doesn't get to eat. And if that's the case, so therefore you see this concept, the one learning onto the other. So now we can go into this into quite a lot of detail, but I want to point out this Rashi here, Ze kinui kinyan oilam. Ze kinui kinyan oilam. It's kind of just like opposite where we are. Have you got it, guys? Ze kinui kinyan oilam. Eved ivri hanirtza beyad kohen. Eved ivri that is nirtza by the kohen. Ve'af al pichein ein gufoy kanui loy keshar avodim. Nonetheless, his body is not completely acquired by him. Keshar avodim, like the other avodim. Avodim kananim le'echol b'trumata, as we said. Now, if I was teaching this in a class at school, this Rashi would be fundamental. Why is this Rashi so fundamental? Why is it so important for us to start playing around with this concept of Toshav and Sachir and Avadim and Kinyan Oilam and Kinyan Gufoy? Why is it so important? So I haven't seen it really yet in its in a brazen way or a very outspoken way. But you know what? To me, the issue is that it's a perfect space for it to be put here, because when a woman gets married, proper Kiddushin, the whole story, right? It's a Kinyan Oilam. Right? It's a kinyan oilam. But at the same time, it's not a kinyan. Because she's not selling herself. She's selling her issues. So too, with a slave, when he's nirtza, he's not selling his kol guf, he's selling his utility, call it, for want of a better word. And so therefore there is a certain way to connect the two of them together. And since there's a certain way of bringing them the two together, I think that's a perfect example that the Gemara brings here, that the Gemara brings in the Toshav and the Sachir. I want you to look just quickly at this Yatza'ach Hinam Tosfos. He says of Yatza'ach Hinam Elu Yemei Bagrus and Kesef Elu Yemei Narus V'im Toimah Tosfos Oz Bereisha Hava Leila Minkat Elu Yemei Narus V'Hada Yemei Bagrus. This is what we said, right? Should have put it the other way around. First you do Narus, and then you do Bagrus. Why do you put Bagrus first? I mean, if you're going to talk about a proper chronology, V'yesh Loimar, listen to this Geshmak. Listen to Geshmak. V'yesh Loimar Mishum the Ein Kasef. Mishum, because of Ein Kasef, Tzarich leukmei lemei narus. You have to use ein kasef laadon zeh aval yesh kesef laadon acher. That's specifically lemei narus. Kedam alael aval yesh kesef laadon acher. The ainu yemei narus. The eina av zakai begedushe bita bogeres. You have, if we had learned v'yatza'ach hinam as being the narus, and kasef being the bogeris, which on its own you could have learned. That's Tosfos' question. Just learn it like that. It says if they had done that, you wouldn't have been able to learn out the previous thing. V'yatza'ach hinam and kesef ladon zeh v'yesh kesef ladon acher. Because when it comes to the father, the ein kesef teaches you kesef ladon acher. But when it comes to the father of a bogeris, he gets nothing. And therefore, even though it's a little bit of a strange chronology, Tosfos admits that it's a strange chronology, that the Torah is writing in a strange way, but it writes in a strange way in order to ensure that Ein Kasef fits for the Nara and not for the Begeris. So my real question says, why did you say V'yatza'ah bli kesef chinam? I mean, I don't ever see an answer to that. I'm trying to rewrite the Torah, but why doesn't it say that? I don't know, but that's what Tosfos says. Let's stop there, guys. And Mitzvah Hashem will carry on with the retort of Abaye on this whole story of how this works, and then we can move on to the Gemara. Okay.
Rov?
Yes.
Two questions. Firstly, when the Gemara says Ani Omer, who's talking?
Where's that?
And the
Hey,
course of
man.
Cain. Va'ani omer. Yomer sachi va'ani omer kanakin and olam.
That's I see what you mean. But it's just the phraseology. The Gemara is talking.
And then also when it's talking about psukim, why does it always say Omar Rahmana when it's quoting psukim?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'll find out for you. That's a nice question. I mean, the Torah is referred to as Rahmana in, I don't know, but why Dafka when it's speaking about psukim? It's a good question. Because sometimes it's the chsiv.
Yeah. Or Shenema.
Or Shenema.
Or Kamosha Amar.
Okay, I'll look that up. I'll give you, please, God. Or Amakra. Okay, good. Amar Rahmana. Maybe they just wanted to give it a bit of spice and just like throw it differently. No, I'm sure there's maybe much bigger than that. Okay, guys. God bless. Shkrach, guys.
Thank you.